Hello everyone, welcome to my channel RPG Retro Reviews, where I, Captain Courageous, review old school modules and games, review fascinating trivia, and do my best to give them a fun and informative analysis. This week I'm going back to 1990 to the Hollow World box set. Written by legendary freelance writer the late Aaron Alston, this massive box set takes D&D back to its pulp roots and adds a massive campaign setting to the world of Mystara. There's a lot to go over in this one, so grab a snack and a soda, and let's just dive right in. Released in 1990, the Hollow World box set contains a 128-page DM sourcebook, a 64-page player's guide, and a 30-page adventure booklet, as well as 4 massive full-color map sheets. 2 sheets give a detailed hex map of the major areas described in the DM sourcebook. 1 sheet giving a side-by-side comparison of the interior and exterior of the planet. And finally, a 4th sheet that shows a pre-Blackmore Cataclysm and post-Cataclysm map of the outer world. For those who are unfamiliar, I did a massive 3-part series on D&D Basic a few years ago, and I went into a bit of detail on the world of Mystara, so you might want to check that out. But let me briefly sum up. The world of Mystara gets its game origins from the Maldvay Cook Expert set and the Isle of Dread module, and was colloquially known as the Known World. There, a small region of the continent of Brune was detailed. Later, those brief descriptions in the Isle of Dread module would later be expanded to encompass 14 award-winning supplements and the Dawn of the Emperor's box set through the Gazetteer series published in the late 1980s. The notion of a hollow world was scientifically suggested by astronomer Edward Halley in the late 17th century, though it was disproven by mathematician Pierre Bouguer and definitively by mathematician Charles Hutton in 1774 with his Schielian experiment to determine the density of the Earth. That fact, however, didn't stop fiction authors such as Jules Verne and his Journey to the Center of the Earth, and Edgar Rice Burroughs at the Earth's Core, as well as William R. Bradshaw with his book The Goddess of Atfadabar. Classic adventure stories detailing a lost world in the center of our own world. These stories were full of strange creatures, dinosaurs, and peculiar tribes of savage humans trying to survive in a bizarre landscape. Certainly these stories were on TSR line editor Bruce Hurd's mind when he came up with the idea of making D&D's known world hollow. Here is a drawing of William R. Bradshaw's interior world of Advantabar, and here side by side is the D&D hollow world. This setting harkens back to D&D pulp roots and classic modules such as the Isle of Dread, a world populated with savage humans, strange creatures, dinosaurs, and the lost civilizations from the world of Mystara. It's a brilliant concept, and it was executed expertly by Aaron Alston, who had already worked on the known world when his supplement, The Grand Duchy of Karamikos, kicked off the Gazetteer series. The Hollow World brilliantly integrated itself with the previous series of Gazetteers by taking the extinct races and cultures discussed in various adventures modules and supplements over the last decade, and giving them a place where they could be experienced without the need for time travel. The Millennian Empire, a takeoff of real-world ancient Greece, the Nithian Empire, based off real-world Egyptians, wiped from the face of Mystara by the Immortals, still thrives in the Hollow World. The Azcan Empire, a take on real-world Aztecs, are here as well, under the thrall of the anthropic immortal Atzanthuatl. There are the jackal-headed Hatalkans, who made their first appearance in the classic D&D module Night's Dark Terror, whose ancestors still thrive on the surface world under the rule of Stefan Karamakos. And on, well beyond the scope of this single video. Suffice to say that the Hollow World pays homage to the deep history of the D&D game, harkening all the way back to the very beginning by including Dave Arneson's Blackmore setting, which is said to have been the impetus for a cataclysm that shook the planet, altering it on its axis and devastating much of the surface 4,000 years prior to the current time of the game. So, with that extensive background on the product out of the way, let's open up the booklets included and see what's inside. The Dungeon Master Sourcebook details the history of the Hollow World, gives an overview of the major races and empires of the setting, as well as a comprehensive look at the Immortals of Mystara. One of the interesting things about this setting for D&D, unlike advanced Dungeons & Dragons, is that there are no deities. There were immortals that essentially served the same function. They gave D&D clerics their spells and were divided into 5 spheres of influence: energy, time, thought, matter, and entropy. Mortals could, once they reached a very high level, pursue one of those spheres of influence and through the accomplishment of a complex series of quests, ascend to immortality. Thus, many of the Mystaran immortals were actually once mortal inhabitants of Mystara. One of these immortals is Ka, known as the Amber Serpent, Kalaktatla, and Ka the Preserver. This immortal was once a mutant Tyrannosaurus Rex that lived millions of years prior to the current timeline. Ka was one of the first beings to discover magic, use it to extend his life, and ultimately pursue the path of the polymath in the sphere of matter and become an immortal being. It was Ka that first made the discovery that Mystara was hollow through a series of cracks and fissures in the surface world. Ka also discovered the World Shield, a layer of magical matter several miles thick that prevents scrying, even that of the Immortals, and also allowed for gravity both on the planet's surface and its interior. Who created this shield was unknown even to the Immortals, but of course Ka wished to find out. Ultimately, it was Ka that hatched the idea of turning this dark, lifeless interior void into a kind of preserve of cultures for those that go extinct on the surface. Of course, such a monumental task he could not take on his own. To create warmth and light, Ka enlisted the immortal Ixion from the sphere of energy, who opened up a tiny pinhole to the plane of energy and created the hollow world's sun. Ordana, the time sphere immortal, created the lakes, streams, and oceans and set up the weather patterns. She also created massive floating continents that orbited around the inner sun, giving one a reckoning of the passage of time and occasional periods of darkness as the massive land moved in front of the sun, blocking its light. Ka himself shaped the intercontinents and made them habitable for various species of life he was planning on supplanting there. Korotiku, immortal for the sphere of time, primarily served as an advisor for the entire affair, and it was he who suggested to Ka that a repository of knowledge should be created, and this resulted in the Lighthouse, a place that is inhabited by species from all over the hollow world who share and exchange ideas. Of course, all this activity did not go unnoticed by immortals from the sphere of entropy, and one of them, Thanatos, created a race of creatures with squid-like anatomy and writhing tendrils. These giant creatures rivaled the immortals in power. Their mental whisperings threatened to drive the intelligent races of the hollow world to madness. With their ability to burrow into the deep places of the world and hide, their presence threatened to undo all that Ka and the other immortals had done. Furthermore, contact between the various cultures threatened to undo and change them irrevocably. For this reason, Ka and his fellow immortals created the Spell of Preservation. The result was that the burrowers became paralyzed in the ground where they resided, and the second was a little nudge in the minds of the inhabitants of the hollow world to reject the customs of others. For the most part, this plan was successful, though the burrowers were not completely destroyed. They remained buried deep underground, sleeping in a suspended state, dimly aware of their surroundings. Their mental power is curtailed, but for a short range, which means when communities that were built over their resting places would find them subtly influenced into delving into forbidden knowledge and experiments that one day might result in their release. Of course, these subtle manipulations go unnoticed by the Immortals. The spell is not absolute either. Individuals from different cultures frequently mingle and even marry. They just cling to their customs and practices. Headstrong individuals can reject their culture in some cases, but such folks tend to become outcasts among their people. So as you can see from this brief overview, that the Hollow World offers the opportunity to play out adventure stories in the grain of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jules Verne, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, and even the existential horror of H.P. Lovecraft. The Player's Guide offers many ways to expand character options for players. The general skill system from all the Gazetteers is consolidated and edited into one cohesive section, a full year before it would be done in the Rules Cyclopedia. The effects of the Hollow World's World Shield on magic is discussed. In addition, spellcasters are very rare in the Hollow World, with a minimum of a 16 intelligence to become a magic user or a 16 wisdom required to become a cleric. Consequently, the concept of the warrior elf is introduced, basically a straight fighter elf rather than the fighter magic user from the core rulebook. In fact, the player's book is just packed with options and introduces 22 new player races and classes, so players can play native to the Hollow World, not just lost, displaced adventurers from the surface. Game options are provided so that players can play everything from beastmen, lizardmen, pirates, Azcan, Millennians, Nithians, and more. There are quite a few human variants as well as variants for dwarves and elves. There's also cubits, which are 18-inch tall humanoids. There are a number of spells that don't work at all in the Hollow World or have limited functionality, and there is a section that goes over all of that. In addition, there are quite a few new spells added that are unique to the setting. Finally, there is the Adventure Book, which details a variety of adventures that can be had in the Hollow World. If the box set has a weakness, I think this would be it. Most of the adventures are outlines rather than complete adventures. It is stunningly devoid of any maps or props of any kind. There's an adventure where the characters are to explore a pyramid, but there's no map of the place, which feels like a missed opportunity. The first adventure is called That Sinking Feeling and details how a group of surface adventurers might inadvertently end up in the Hollow World. Essentially, the PCs are passengers on an ocean-going ship called the Sea Gallop. During a storm, the ship is sucked into a whirlpool and ends up in a vast underground river chamber, speeding uncontrollably to who knows where. Well, we know, but the PCs don't. It's very reminiscent of the Sid and Marty Krofft Saturday morning show Land of the Lost. On board is a special cargo, essentially being smuggled into the Hollow World by the immortal Atzinthuatl. The most interesting part of this adventure is when the ship reaches the World Shield and gravity begins to act funky as the ship experiences the transition from outer world gravity to Hollow World gravity. It's a 10-day trip, which culminates with the PCs stranded in a strange land with a never-ending sun. The rest of the adventures in the book are a series of side treks, which have the PCs stumbling along from one culture to the next, apparently wandering about the Hollow World with no specific purpose whatsoever. The primary adventure is the Gem of Nether, which has a beautiful jungle princess from a tribe of Nether being pursued against her will for marriage by what is apparently a very randy Scatnelfin elven leader, General Corillidin. And the PCs help her escape his clutches. Afterwards, the other adventures are essentially those which happen upon the adventurers. There's one in the Antillean Waste, one in the Azcan territory, the Beastman territory, the Bruteman's territory, and so on. You get the idea. I would have preferred something a lot more cohesive that showed the potential for a campaign in the Hollow World than just a series of random side treks. The adventure book finishes up with a sort of mini monster manual with statistics on the various creatures that are unique to the setting, like the bat-like flap sails ridden by the Scatnelfin elves, as well as a few dinosaur and Ice Age era creatures like the woolly mammoth. A Hollow World box set has, of course, been out of print for some time, and like all of the Gazetteers, acquiring an original print copy can be an expensive affair. eBay usually lists the thing for around $30 to $50 depending on condition and completeness. However, getting a great copy of the set both on PDF and in print is only $21.99 at Drive-Thru RPG. As with other out-of-print, on-demand products of this type, it is an all-in-one booklet rather than 3 separate booklets, but the maps are consolidated and quite nice and not broken into hard-to-follow chunks like some PDFs do with poster maps. The cover art for this set is by illustrator Frank Fields, whose work appeared in many TSR publications in the 1990s. Interior art by Thomas Baxa and Thomas Nelson, and like other products of this era, were of high quality. So let's use my D20 review scale and take a look at the Hollow World box set for presentation, style, and value. Presentation-wise, this is straight up TSR 1990s format at its best. The box is just stuffed with beautiful poster maps and text-dense source material. It is very well organized, and finding a specific topic is relatively easy. Whether you are looking up information on an Immortal, a specific region of the Hollow World, a skill, or one of the many new character classes, the format and organization makes it super easy to find what you're looking for. However, the adventures presented, while serviceable, are very minimalist and have no cohesion. If you played these and loved them, it's because your DM developed the material presented, not because they are really great adventures. Also, the burrowers are set up in the history of the module as these Lovecraftian Great Old Ones style of entities, but there are no game information provided at all, and they are barely mentioned except for the history, which leads to the creation of the Spell of Preservation, which is a bit disappointing. So I'm going to rate the presentation for this box set a 14. Style-wise, this is pulp fantasy at its best. There are tons of options for players to engage in the savage setting and plenty of room for the DM to develop their own areas with lots of open territory on the map. So I'm going to rate this an 18. Finally, let's look at value. It's hard to believe, but 3 booklets and 4 poster maps and the gateway to endless pulp fantasy adventure would only run you $18 US in 1990. What a deal! Furthermore, this epic fantasy supplement can still be purchased in print at Drive-Thru RPG for only $21.99. If you are a fan of Advanced Labyrinth Lord, Swords and Wizardry, Old School Essentials, or many other OSR-type games, you can basically use the class, races, and monsters as written with little or no modification, and that includes the general skill system, thus vastly expanding the character options for your players. So in this case, I'm just going to assign a value rating of a natural 20, a critical hit. Thus, the overall rating of the Hollow World box set is a 17. Very good. Coming up, I have a few reviews based on the requests and the comments I've received over the last few months. I've sprung for the Dungeon Crawl Classics game from Goodman Games, so you should see that review in the next week or so. I'm also going to review the first edition Dragonlance Adventures hardcover as well. Of course, the final video on my massive review on the City of Brass from Frog God Games finishes up next week as well. Please don't forget to subscribe and click the little bell so you can get notifications when I upload more content. Like, comment, and share. Join the RPG Retro Review Facebook group and consider supporting the channel by becoming a Patreon. As always, my friends, may your D20 roll true and game on.